You're listening to The Abundance Agenda, a podcast about growth and progress. I'm James O'Malley.
And I'm Martin Robbins.
This week, is Britain about to finally end the tyranny of England's Sunday trading laws? But first, Martin's been digging into HS2, literally.
So James, recently I had a chance to pay a visit to one of Northamptonshire's greatest undiscovered tourist attractions.
I'm intrigued, Martin. Was it the famous lift testing tower, which is a genuine real thing in Northampton? That feels like it would be the sort of on-brand thing we do on this podcast.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd want to go on that ride, but it definitely sounds fascinating. But no, even better, I went to a village called Chipping Warden to visit some of the construction sites for HS2, fan favourite for listeners of the podcast. And so specifically, this was a visit to see some of the new green tunnels being built at Great Worth and Chipping Warden. And I can guess what your first question is going to be, James.
I was going to say, I've got so many questions. Number one, what is a Chipping Warden?
So I'm glad you asked. So Chipping Warden, it's a tiny village between Banbury and Daventry, which are two of those sorts of places in the middle of England that nobody quite knows where they are, except they're in the middle of England somewhere. They're actually near where the Battle of Edgecote took place during the War of the Roses, if you're into your history podcasts. It's home to about 500 people, mostly Tories, I suspect, and it's now the site of a massive HS2 field office, I guess you'd call it. So there's this enormous temporary structure, these sorts of Godzilla-sized porter cabins, a massive car park with hundreds of vehicles in it. All of this is about the same size or even bigger than the village itself. And it's quite easy to find. It turns out it's very easy to find HS2 sites when you're going onto Google Maps, because you can literally just go onto the satellite view and you can see this like brown line going up the country where we're kind of carving the earthworks across the land. It's pretty impressive.
That's what sort of amazes me about HS2, Martin, and that you sometimes forget the scale. I think you hear about all of these individual developments, the new bridge, the new tunnel, the new thing they're having to build, but they're having to do this literally all the way to Birmingham with no gaps in one long row. So there is just like an enormous, unfathomably large building site. So I guess my big question though, Martin, is from what you've said. You said this was a green tunnel. How is that different from a normal tunnel? And I mean, other than the fact that we're talking about it because you've got to go and see it, which is incredibly cool, why should people listening who didn't get to see it, including me, care about this?
Okay, so let me try and put this in some context for you. Now, first of all, James, it turns out, and I don't know if you knew this, but HS2 is incredibly expensive. Were you aware of that, James?
Yeah, I think we've probably mentioned it on the podcast at least once or twice.
Yeah, so one of the biggest reasons for that is that basically during the original consultation process, everybody insisted that the bits of railway near them should be built in tunnels. So the consultation period, it's a bit like Oprah Winfrey handing out cards. You get a tunnel and you get a tunnel and you get a tunnel for like every local politician, an MP, and pretty much every constituency between London and Birmingham gets its own tunnel. And that's obviously pushed the cost of the project up enormously compared to more grown-up countries that would just whack a nice viaduct across the land and be done with it, basically.
Yeah, this was something we talked about a few weeks ago with Sally Gimson, who wrote a book about HS2 and the politics behind it and so on. And she basically catalogues in her book the great buying off that happened when every sort of, I think every Tory cabinet minister marched into David Cameron's office and said, I want a tunnel. But Martin, you still haven't answered the question. What is the deal? What is the difference between a green tunnel and a normal tunnel?
So when you think about railway tunnels, you're probably thinking about things like Crossrail or the Channel Tunnel, where you've got these big tunnel boring machines deep underground that are carving through the earth like kind of industrial moles. But green tunnels are very, very different. They're built using more of a cut and cover kind of technique. So you carve out a cutting in the landscape, you plop the railway into that, but then you cover the whole thing over again with earth and eventually fields, and that's where the whole green part comes from.
So I guess it's a bit like the original tube lines in London where, you know, even though it was going to be an underground train, they built it by literally digging up the roads and burying a train in there before putting the road back on top again.
Right, and so this is what made the trip quite fascinating and quite informative, because when you hear cut and cover, it sounds pretty simple, right? But actually it's not. It's a massively complicated thing to do, and it really has kind of pushed the limits of engineering knowledge, and not just the engineering, but the logistics involved. And once you understand these things, it really begins to transform your understanding of why HS2 is so expensive and why even small delays like the ones happening due to Dobbin Lane that we've talked about previously can lead to catastrophic increases in costs and delays and so on.
So it's not just digging a trench in the ground and then covering it up with grass and sprinkling some more new grass seed on top and job done.
So in a way, yes, but what you've said is much, much harder than you imagine, right? So let's start with just the earthworks. HS2 is effectively a massive earthworks project, one of the biggest that's ever been attempted. There's more earthworks than there is actual construction or building of anything. So just in this part of the line, which is the 25 kilometers or so between Great Worth and Southam, they're moving something around 13 million cubic meters of earth. The groundwater from all of this work alone, dealing with all of that, requires 55 kilometers of drainage channels to deal with all of that water. And they've built whole ponds and artificial lakes where they're storing that water to reuse it later on in other parts of the project. They have these incredible 90-ton excavators that can fill a 45-ton truck in literally 3 scoops. So in order to stop them from slowing down, they have 183 of those 45-ton trucks going constantly back and forth like a giant conveyor belt. Just on this stretch, it's like one of the biggest concentrations of construction vehicles anywhere in the world. I think for Caterpillar, it's like literally the highest concentration of Caterpillar trucks that exists on the planet.
Oh my God. You associate things of that scale with stuff in China, but this is just happening in the middle of rural England, in that mystery zone between Birmingham and Leicester and Northampton or something?
The flyover shires,
yeah.
I guess.
So where's all the earth going, Martin? What are they doing when they're digging it all out of the ground? They've got to put it somewhere, I guess.
So if they took it off site, it would be astronomically expensive. So as far as possible, they want to keep it where it is. And one of the fascinating things about HS2 is that the whole gradient and level of the route is designed to be as earth neutral as possible. So, we've heard about things like carbon neutral, but being earth neutral, what they're trying to do is take earth from one place and reuse it nearby as far as possible so that they don't have to cart it off and dispose of it, which would cost millions and millions and millions of pounds.
That sounds better than my idea, which would be to cart it to East Anglia and finally give Norwich a mountain.
Well, I was thinking Boris Island as well, which would be the other perfect location for it. Just ship it up the Thames, job done. But yeah, so they're obviously not going to take all of this off site, so they can build embankments and things and kind of reuse that earth. But still, moving it is incredibly hard. They're driving around this vast construction site that basically extends from London to Birmingham, but is weirdly narrow. So as you're kind of walking around, there's literally cows in fields, looking down at you in this big, trench that's being built through the earth. And even driving on this in these big trucks is an incredibly skilled thing. The drivers have to learn by basically driving the route for a week to understand every sort of bump and divot and part of it. And they're making hundreds and hundreds of trips every single day. It's an astonishing amount of just moving earth around.
Let's not bury the lead, Martin. Did you get to go on a digger?
Sadly not. I got to watch a crane, but they wouldn't let me go on the diggers. It was raining when I went, and the diggers can't do anything in the rain.
One day, Martin, when we have our big corporate away day for Abundance Media, we're going to go to Diggerland and we're going to drive diggers.
Oh, that's a promise, James. I'm looking forward to that day. But it's also not just fun and doing donuts in diggers. It's pretty serious business, and it's incredibly optimized to a level that's quite staggering. So the thing, and I'm going to come on now because I think what I really want to get to in this segment is there are a whole bunch of things that people don't understand about HS2, and once you realize them, it puts a lot of the other stuff into perspective. So one of these things is that the big costs are fixed and monthly. So you're employing crews and you're renting machinery and land and nearby barns. And that's a fixed cost that's just racking up day after day, week after week, month after month. And so you're always trying to be more efficient wherever possible. You're doing 500 trips a day with these trucks. So even if you're saving a minute per trip, that adds up very, very quickly. And so there always has to be a truck to meet the excavator when it does a scoop. You can't have it sitting idle for any amount of time. And this extends to things like they actually got human beings to stand at all of the junctions on these dirt tracks because drivers were slowing down instinctively when they came to the junction in case something was coming across it. And so having people there standing and signaling to the driver that it was okay would just stop them taking their foot off the accelerator and keep them at a constant speed. And even that saves millions of pounds.
That's fascinating, Martin. There's a big construction site near me, and there's always just a guy standing there out front, seemingly doing nothing. But I guess, yeah, he must be doing something which is more valuable than all the added costs you mentioned. So this sounds like it would be a really tough job at the best of times, let alone in bad weather, because Britain famously, we get quite a lot of rain, which I imagine must change things.
Well, so they don't operate in bad weather. And this is the second thing that I think people don't fully realize, which is that building HS2 is a lot like farming. It's basically seasonal and it's highly weather dependent. So you can't dig when it's wet. You can't do these earthworks. You can't drive trucks on a lot of the tracks because they basically just turn to wet clay. And everything has to happen in sequence. So yeah, you build the foundation of the tunnel after you've leveled the earth, and then you do each part basically in sequence behind that, which means that you've got all of these dependencies. And say an excavator breaks down with a day's worth of excavation to go, and let's say it takes a few days to fix it. Now you're 4 days behind. But if it then rains for the next week, suddenly you're like 2 weeks behind. And if you've now run into the winter, suddenly you're 4 months behind. So even a small delay can just start to rack up because of the weather or other things that it interacts with.
So, Martin, is there any good news? We've had a really warm summer, or so I'm told. I've been sat under my air conditioning all summer. Has that been good for building?
Yeah, so genuinely, they've made a lot of progress this year, and they've actually done better than they expected to do, in large part because it's been an unusually warm, hot, and dry summer. So they're actually ahead of the targets that they set for themselves this year. So it really does help.
So does that mean we could be looking at maybe, 2038 or whatever it is rather than 2039?
I think steady on. I think there's probably still some challenges to come.
Okay, Martin. So, like you say, with us earthworks, there's so much more complex than you think. But I guess once that's done, and they must have done quite a lot of that now, they've been digging HS2 for a while, but once that's been dug out of the ground, you can just drop in some concrete, put a train inside, job done, cover it over?
So it turns out, once again, James, that building HS2 is less simple than we naively expected. And this actually comes nicely onto the third thing that I think people don't understand, which is, again, you talk about a cut and cover green tunnel, right? Now, what you're basically doing is they're casting these concrete structures off-site, and they use them to build sections of the tunnel. So they have like a structure for the left wall, a structure for the middle wall, for the right wall, because it's two tunnels going through it, and then two arches that they drop on top and kind of put in place. And that creates a kind of McDonald's logo, effectively, which is a cross-section of the tunnel, and they just keep putting those down. And that effectively builds the core structure of the tunnel. But what you're basically doing is building a really long, 3 mile long building, and you can't just pile thousands of tons or tens of thousands of tons of earth on top of a building because you'll basically collapse it. And so it's not the same as digging a tunnel where you're deep underground and you're going through strong, stable, compacted rock and kind of making a hole through something that's solid. You're effectively building something. And if you get that building even slightly wrong, the whole thing can just collapse. And this actually happened at Gerrard's Cross on the Chiltern Main Line in 2005. They wanted to build, of all things, a Tesco supermarket over the top of a railway. It was kind of like a land reclamation project. They didn't have a suitable area to build on. So they thought, well, why not cover over the railway, put, I guess it's not a green tunnel, more of a grey tunnel, like a big Tesco car park, and a superstore on top of that. And it was a brilliant idea. So they started making the tunnel. They began backfilling the trench with earth while the railway line was actually in operation to try and get this thing going.
I'm amazed this got planning permission, Martin. Where were Britain's NIMBYs when someone was trying to build something? This would have been a perfect excuse to cancel the whole thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, and actually, we could almost do an episode on that supermarket because it was a 7-year saga. John Prescott got involved. This is like from the late 90s that it was first being proposed. And there was a huge protest from locals because they wanted a Marks and Spencer food hall instead of a Tesco. They thought it was apparently a bit beneath them. But
is that real? Is that true? Is that a true thing?
That's genuinely a quote I saw in some of the articles were like, oh, we wish it were a Marks and Spencer. We'd probably back it then. But yeah. But Tesco, come on. Which is a sentiment I can get behind. But I mean, this turned into almost a catastrophe because effectively, if you imagine that sort of arch that you've built out of concrete and you're piling rubble and earth and things on top of it, imagine if you just press down on the top of an arch, but you're not pressing in from the sides as well. The danger is the whole thing just caves in and the sides kind of push outwards. So you've got to be really, really careful to balance the loads as you're piling the earth back into this trench. And if there's rain or heavy rain, as there was at Gerrard's Cross in 2005, that's all soaking into the soil and changing the weights and the distribution of weights. So at any rate, at 7:34 p.m. on the 30th of June, just after rush hour, incredibly luckily, a whole long series of these arches just gave way. 100-foot long section of the tunnel collapsed, and something like 15,000 tons of earth piled down onto the train tracks and just completely obliterated it. There was a train approaching from High Wycombe at the time.
Oh my God.
They got a warning from a radio over the radio, luckily, and basically had to put on the emergency brakes. Luckily, we're able to stop and get people off at a golf course, which I think, along with the Marks and Spencer, tells you something about the area that they're operating in. But all joking aside, it was an absolute miracle that nobody was injured. If there had been a train in the tunnel at the time, and again, bear in mind this is like 7:30 in the evening, hundreds of people could have been killed by this.
Holy shit, I've got no memory of this happening. I mean, I would have been around and reading the news at the time. This sounds like it would have been a big deal. Bloody hell.
Well, you would think so, but a very minor incident happened the week later, which was the 7th of July bombings in London. Ooh. So I suspect that probably what happened is that it was a fairly big deal, but attention quickly moved on to other things, which is probably a good thing if you're Tesco. But anyway, so the point here is that backfilling is like an entire science in its own right. The consistency of the ground has to be perfect. It has to be porous enough to allow rainwater to drain through it, but compact enough that it's not going to move around or the weights aren't going to change or shift. And if they get even a tiny piece of this wrong, they're constantly using sensors and assessments to test it as they go along. If they find that a bit's wrong, they have to undo a whole section of the tunnel, lift tens of thousands of tons of earth back out again and refill it. So this is like a science project, effectively. And then, the tunnel itself underneath has to be waterproofed with a repairable membrane system. And even that's not a solved problem. They had to build basically a prototype tunnel section nearby to test out different ways of waterproofing it. Because obviously if there's a puncture, you need to be able to reliably repair it. And this is all new stuff that we're trying to understand for the first time, effectively.
But this is blowing my mind a bit. It sounds like a research project, but we've had tunnels for years. Do we really need to prototype and test stuff? I mean, surely people have dug tunnels before.
Well, to some extent, it is a research project. And to give you one last example, which kind of gets to your implied question, the speed of trains entering the tunnel is a whole other problem. So when they built high-speed trains in Japan for the first time, they ran them through normal train tunnels. And what they hadn't realized is that if you have a train doing 200 miles an hour and you slam that into a narrow space inside a tunnel, suddenly the air in that tunnel has nowhere to go. So it's effectively like a sonic boom. When a plane is going so fast, the air can't get out of the way fast enough. You're stuck inside this tunnel. The pressure builds to massive levels. There's an enormous blast, and it can actually damage trains because the forces involved in the air pressure are so high. So when you see high-speed trains in Japan with those massive long noses on them, that's nothing to do with going faster or streamlining for going through the air. Or it kind of is, but it's specifically for tunnels. It's to make the interface with the tunnel longer so that the air has more time to be displaced around the front of the train. And that's why the noses on those trains are famously so long.
Oh my God. This is blowing my mind, Martin. I mean, I thought it was also just because they look really cool.
I mean, probably it is also because they look really cool, but I mean, it's that's the official reason, right? So in England, we're not going to have those long noses on the trains. Instead, we're going to have tunnel portals that actually kind of breathe. So the idea is that the walls of the entrances to the tunnels are porous. And as the train hits the end of the tunnel, the air gets pushed through the holes in the walls and the whole thing kind of like breathes out and then back in again. And again, all of this sort of gives you an idea that we're right at the limits of engineering knowledge and understanding. Everything from soil movement to hydrodynamics to air displacement to even the curbs inside the tunnel that are designed to handle, what would happen if an HS2 train derailed at 200 miles an hour inside a tunnel. All of this has more in common with, the Apollo program than a standard civil engineering projects, right?
As in, taking up an enormous percentage of GDP, wildly uncostly.
I think the Apollo program was more on budget, so maybe the extension doesn't quite.
So, Martin, other countries, though, we're not the first country to try and build a high-speed train. It doesn't seem that impossible. Other countries have done it, like you mentioned, Japan. So most of these problems must surely have already been solved?
Well, so yes and no. So certainly they've learned an enormous amount from French engineers and from places like Japan, France, Spain, but there's a fundamental difference in basically the scale and complexity of what we're trying to do. So if chipping Warden were in China or Japan or even Spain or Belgium, none of which I think are options that the residents of chipping Warden would be very pleased by. That's another matter. But in those cases, you would just build this railway on a viaduct. And it would look very nice, and it would just go over the tops of the fields, and it would be a fraction of the price. And things like green tunnels, where they existed, would be quite small and quite rare. So, we have them in France, but they're not necessarily that long or that frequently used. But in the UK, we're building miles of these things for essentially just political reasons. So we're not doing all of this to solve an engineering problem, even though it's a fun engineering problem to solve. We're solving these engineering problems to get around a political problem. And we're paying tens of billions of pounds extra to do it. I won't say who this was because I might not be allowed back again, but somebody made a joke to me that you could have just made all the villagers in the area millionaires and it would have been cheaper than doing this and probably solved a lot of the local objections. And obviously that was a tongue-in-cheek comment, but mathematically it's frighteningly close to being accurate.
It's slightly scary, Martin, how many problems can be solved just by, shoveling money at people like that. It reminds me of like your NHS plan a few episodes ago where basically you said, we'll just pay for everyone to go on Ozempic and it will sort out the obesity problem. And that seems like a much more direct way of solving the problem. So yeah, maybe we should just pay off all these already presumably quite affluent golf club attending people.
Yeah, I mean, there are probably other negative side effects of the systematic use of bribery, but, we can deal with those later. But it's effectively what the BAT tunnel is, right? The famous BAT infrastructure project there, because essentially it's an insurance policy. I forget who originally made the point, but it's not really there to protect bats or to, improve bat populations or anything like that. It's largely just to stop them getting sued. And so they've had to throw £100 million at this giant structure in the middle of nowhere. And ultimately, it's these political reasons, it's the insistence on putting absolutely everything in tunnels that are why the costs escalated and why, for now at least, we're not going further to the north. Politicians made these choices. They were completely oblivious to the consequences, or they didn't really care about the consequences down the line. And so, the knock-on effects of that is it became much harder to do the rest of the projects, and the phases to Leeds and Manchester and so on will probably not happen for many years. And the other big tragedy of this is that, much like the nuclear industry in the 20th century, we'll have learned all of these engineering lessons. We'll have done all of this research and science to build this line. We'll know exactly how to build it better next time. And then we'll just lose all of that knowledge because we won't do it. And if we do come to it again in 20 years' time, we'll have to learn the whole damn thing again.
It's a bit like if you asked me to factor a polynomial equation. I couldn't do that these days, even though I could 20 years ago. Anyway, Martin, I think if people don't want to lose any knowledge, then they should definitely like and subscribe our podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, you can do that now. We're now on YouTube. Like the Abundance Agendas page, subscribe to us there, or just make sure you're subscribed in your podcast app to get our show every week. And retain that special, important knowledge of whatever it is we're talking about. Is that a good enough tenuous link to call people to action, Martin?
I mean, if anything, James, it could be more tenuous, but I think we'll go with it.
Now, Martin, let's talk about the single biggest problem in my life.
Is it the electric scooter that's gathering dust in your cupboard, as we learned about in recent episodes? Is that the grievance that you're going to use this podcast to address once again?
It's even worse than that, Martin. It's the problem that it's basically impossible to buy a loaf of bread at 5 p.m. on a Sunday.
Yeah, James, it's really annoying. Quite often on a Sunday evening, I really fancy a big loaf of bread and I just can't find one anywhere. It's quite annoying.
Yeah, this is what annoys me. So you want to do some shopping. It's a Sunday evening. You live near a slightly larger supermarket rather than a convenience store, and you can't because of England's absurd Sunday trading laws. And I do mean England there because Scotland doesn't have any truck with this nonsense. And I want to talk about it this week because according to The Grocer magazine, which I'm sure everyone listening is a regular reader of, the government is reportedly, quote, revisiting proposals to relax restrictions on shops opening on a Sunday.
So what's prompted that?
So apparently the idea is being discussed as we speak in the Department of Business and in the Treasury, and it's basically the result of a quid pro quo with big business. So in the forthcoming budget, which we now know is going to be in November, Rachel Reeves is thinking about hiking business rates to bring in some more money from big businesses, and then to cut rates, I think, to help out small businesses, and then to keep big business happy, she's going to basically say, well, why not open later on a Sunday? Everyone wins. And if this does happen, then I think this is really good news. And I'm quite excited about the idea because it's just a really annoying thing to me. I hate the fact that Sundays are so restricted. And I guess more broadly and more importantly, I think this could also be a relatively easy win for sort of stimulating a bit more economic growth and getting the economy moving. Because if shops can open for longer hours, then it stands to reason that more economic activity will happen.
So this is kind of an interesting question, right? Because people often say that, like, if the shops can open longer, there'll be more economic activity. But is there actually evidence for that? Like, do we know that that's the case?
Yeah, so maybe I'm overstating it. Maybe I really just do want to buy bread at 5 p.m. on a Sunday because the evidence is mixed, I'd say. So there's not actually that much to go on. So in 2006, the Department of Trade and Industry, which is what the business department was called about 4 names ago, there was some sort of independent study they commissioned, which reckoned it could add £1.4 billion to our GDP annually. That was 2 decades ago now, and the economy has changed since, and the world has changed since, so who knows how relevant that is. More recently, in 2016, there was a study or a campaign by the New West End Company, which is like the lobby group for Oxford and Regent Street in London. They said that if you extended opening hours there by just 2 hours, it could bring in an extra 190 to 290 million pounds every year because tourists in London would have more opportunities to spend their money before flying away again. So again, I'm not entirely sure how well that scales outside of tourist areas. And there are more sceptical arguments that if we opened up Sunday trading and let shops open whenever they want, it wouldn't create more activity, but it would just shift it around a bit. But all that said, Martin, I still think this is a good idea. And that's because I think there's a strong circumstantial case that this would support growth. Because basically, the current Sunday trading restrictions, which, as we all know, shops can't open for more than 6 hours on a Sunday, I think this is an example of what economists call deadweight loss. So, the cost of all the sorts of inefficiencies in a system. So with current hours so restricted, if you go to the supermarket on a Sunday, you'll probably find yourself queuing for much longer or getting stuck in traffic. And it's just harder to get around because everyone's trying to fit that same activity into the same window of time when they could be doing something more productive instead. And I also think as well, in an era where we have the internet where when shops are closed, we can just order things online. Maybe this could actually help our high streets. People traditionally think big box stores, big large supermarkets hurt the high streets. But if shops are open, then that now gets people out of their homes. Maybe if people are coming back and forth from the larger supermarkets, maybe they'll be thinking, well, let's go to a local restaurant or let's do some sort of leisure activity outside away from our screens. And I just think basically, fundamentally, I can't get beyond it, Martin. Sunday trading laws, they're just really dumb.
I mean, I think you lack imagination, James. I'd like to see Sunday trading laws extended and made even more absurd. So perhaps we could close the internet from 4 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon and stop online shopping as well, drive people to the stores instead. But no, I mean, you've used a lot of fancy economic language there, James, and some less fancy language. Is it not just the fact that you're an atheist and you hate Jesus, that you just don't respect our holiest of days?
Well, I think this gets a bit at why the law is so absurd. So the current restrictions have been in place since 1994, and there's been various sort of failed attempts to liberalise the law since. And every time it's come up against a campaign group called Keep Sunday Special. And their argument is, well, we should be, using Sundays to spend time with our families or to, be worshipping or whatever. But it just seems bizarre to me because Britain obviously isn't a monoculture. It wasn't in 1994, even less so is now. So the idea that people are going to do these very prescriptive things, I think, is just a bit silly, especially as well when the current law allows literally almost everything else to open up. It's just like large supermarkets in B&Q which are being screwed by this. So it seems like a really specific thing. And anyway, I think if Jesus really is as great as people says he is, then surely going on about love thy neighbour surely that should hold its own against, every little helps.
So I think one of the things that makes this whole thing incredibly challenging is just how confusing it is, right? So even when I was growing up, places were often closed on Wednesday afternoons, and now we have Sunday trading laws, but they apply differently to different places, and you sort of have to have this constant battle with yourself, or checking with Google to figure out like which thing is open to what time. Is it 11 till 5? Is it 9 till 4? It's very confusing. So what exactly are the current restrictions?
Yeah, so it is a bit confusing. And our Sunday trading laws are by far not the worst in Europe. In other countries, in places like Germany and Switzerland, they allow supermarkets to only open on a Sunday if they're in a train station. So you get like really outsized supermarkets in train stations, or everyone heading down to the train station just to do their shopping on a Sunday. But anyway, so in Britain, the law currently is supermarkets, stores over 280 metres squared large, which is basically a bit larger than a tennis court.
Oh, well, we've all got tennis courts, so that's a very easy comparison to make.
I tried to pick the most relatable analogy.
Yeah.
So if you're smaller than 280 meters, you can open whenever you want, no restrictions. If you're larger, then you're only allowed to open for a maximum of 6 hours on a Sunday, and you can pick any time in an 8-hour window from 10 a.m. until 6 p.m.
So this does just seem anachronistic and fussy and annoying, and liberalising the law sounds like a great idea that kind of most people would be behind. But if that's the case, why hasn't it been done yet? Why has it taken 30 years since the last reform?
Well, so the funny thing about this debate is it sort of screws around with the political coalitions and like who's for and against it. And you end up with like really conservative religious people teaming up with like left-wing trade unions. So one of the biggest arguments against opening up the Sunday trading laws is the trade unions, who obviously have a very strong influence on the Labour Party. They don't want the law loosened because it could conceivably, in their view, make it easier to exploit workers or force people to work on a day when, you previously had legal protections to stop you being forced to work there. And I get that because I used to work in a shop and it was really hard work. So people like that can get exploited quite easily. And then there's the argument as well made by groups like the FSB, not Putin's security services, but the Federation of Small Business. And basically, there's more a sort of self-interest argument. So they say if big shops can open, then theoretically that hurts the small businesses as Sunday restrictions. It's basically like a de facto subsidy to small corner shops and the like, and independent stores that are smaller. And basically that's achieved by restricting supply of alternatives in the form of big supermarkets. But ultimately, I just don't really buy any of these arguments.
Is that because we're recording this on a Sunday afternoon and the shops have just closed?
So the trade union argument, right? I, again, raise my fist in the air. I'm with the workers on this. But I don't think there's any reason you couldn't loosen the rules on the opening times of shops while retaining worker protections for Sundays. Or you could make the law so people can pick a day when they can't be forced to work. You can say to businesses, open up, but still maybe you've got to pay people slightly more to work on those days. Or you can't sack someone if they don't want to work because they're religious or something like that.
Yeah, you mean like podcasters, like the way I'm forced to record this podcast on a Sunday afternoon by my militant capitalist boss.
Absolutely, Martin. And, smaller businesses as well. I'm sympathetic to the argument in principle because you get your local convenience store at the end of the road. I want like walkable communities where people don't have to take their car to go and buy essentials. But the reality is that, smaller shops are increasingly the chains anyway. So like 29%, according to one study, of convenience stores are operated by chains, your Tesco Expresses and your Sainsbury's Locals and the like. Tesco, for example, they've got over 2,000 Tesco Express stores today, and they say 77% of people in Britain live within 10 minutes drive of one. Incidentally, the first time Tesco opened an Express store was 1994, so clearly they saw the change in the law and thought, well, we can adapt our stores to work with this new law. And here's another thing, Martin. Here's my most annoying opinion, which everyone will secretly agree with, but find infuriating, right? That these chains, I think, are better than independent stores. And obviously we all like the idea of the independent small trader. I can see you've got your head in your hands I'm
James.
defending the capitalist extractive system here. But the reason they're better is because supermarkets are like a miracle of logistics, right? So, if you have a bigger chain, a bigger store providing stuff with complex supply chains, you can have more products available, you can have better, more reliable stock, you have higher quality goods that's fresher and so on. Instead of the local shop going to a cash and carry and buying a box of crisps and then leaving it in a storeroom for however long and bringing it in a van or whatever, instead you have supermarket sized logistics, which means you can maintain better hygiene, you can maintain a cold chain as you bring stuff from distribution centers to shops, and it just works out better, doesn't it? Is that a horrible thing to say?
I'll just add corner shop owners to, residents from Cambridge and whoever else is on the long list of people that we've now offended on this podcast, James. Okay, so how realistic is it? Is there a genuine prospect that the law might finally be about to change and at least one of your long list of grievances from this podcast is actually going to be dealt with?
Martin, you can't chastise me for using this podcast for settling scores here, because I think you're winning on that front at the moment. So, but this is the mad thing, right? So I can't claim any particular insight here other than beyond what the grocer is reporting, but it seems to be well sourced. And they say basically it's not like there's a law that's been proposed. There's nothing been published about it on gov.uk, but they say discussions are going on inside government about doing this. And here's the crazy thing about this, and this is going to be needlessly self-aggrandizing, but I sort of think it might be my fault that this is being talked about.
I mean, really, James? Really? Really?
So, okay, I don't think I actually believe this. Well, maybe I do. I don't know. I wrote a piece on my Substack a few weeks ago about Sunday trading, maybe about a month ago, where I basically made a similar argument to the one I just made to you about it being terrible for all these different reasons. I published it on there, and then the next day, our friends at the think tank Labour Together, they saw my post and they commissioned a poll of the general public to see what people actually think about this. And that was hilarious in its own right. Someone commissioned a poll off the back of something I'd written, which was very, very funny. But the mad thing was, it came back, and it turns out this is probably the one issue in the world where I'm on the popular side of public opinion.
Good Lord.
So Labour Together, they asked if people thought the Sunday trading laws should be devolved down to local authorities. So not an outright sort of liberalisation. It should be the local council gets to decide whether shops can open longer. This was actually something the coalition government tried to do, and I think it was 2015, one of David Cameron's last things he did in office before the referendum and so on. And it came back. And again, I want to emphasise, this is a real scientific poll. This isn't just a clicker on Twitter or something. This is a real thing. And it came back and found that 22% of people strongly support the idea of changing the law, 25% of people somewhat support it, and just 12% strongly oppose and 14% somewhat oppose. In other words, it's 46% of people on my side, the side of righteousness and justice, and 26% of people who are wrong.
So almost half, basically. This is where we are. Nearly half of people, not quite, but almost half, agree with you.
Perhaps, but we've got the plurality, and that's the main thing, Martin. And amazingly, Martin, this is actually consistent across demographics, however you slice them. So most of the major political parties supported changing the law, but guess which one didn't?
Was it Reform again?
Not quite, Martin. It was, of course, the Greens, because they hate progress, apparently.
Amazing. Left Reform.
Exactly. So just to be clear, Labour, Tory, Lib Dem, even Reform voters want to get rid of the Sunday trading laws. So if this happens, I am going to fully, unfairly, completely unjustifiably take credit for this, because maybe someone in the Treasury or DBT saw the Labour Together polling. Maybe, and this is going to sound massively arrogant, maybe they read my Substack post about this, because I know I have readers inside those departments. Maybe it sparks the idea in someone's head that this is something they could change, because it's the sort of thing that you don't really think about until someone says, oh yeah, that is stupid. So maybe this could be it.
Nobody's ever thought of opening a shop on a Sunday, James, so clearly must have been you. But thanks for your efforts anyway. And I guess also just to clarify for people, when we talk about The Grocer, that is a magazine for supermarkets, not for large German people. Just to be clear on that.
So, Martin, before we get on with this week's guest, let's do a bit of housekeeping. So if you're enjoying the Abundance Agenda this week, pull out your phone, go to your podcast app, give us 5 stars, post a comment on YouTube. As someone said this week, it is, quote, absolutely based that we are now on YouTube, whatever that means. So yeah, go and share the show, send a link to your friends, do all that, promote the show, feed our egos.
So, James, we are both multimedia nodes. We have Substack newsletters as well as the podcast. What have you been writing about over on yours this week, James?
So my most recent thing is still about the whole Cambridge sewage works shit show, literal shit show almost, which we talked about on last week's show. I've got a whole written piece to go along with that, which goes more. And this is the tease. This is how we get people to listen to our show to go and click and read an article. It's got more details on the Green Book process for how the value for money calculation was done. So go and have a look at that.
Oh, riveting stuff, James.
I've got some other fun stuff coming up later this week, but I'm going to keep that quiet for now. Martin, what have you been writing about this week?
Nothing. I've been completely lazy, so you'll just have to wait until the next time, and I'll have something scandalous for you.
Excellent. With a tease as enthusiastic as that, Martin, I cannot wait. Okay, so let's get on with this week's guest. And it's a really good one this week, I think. So I've been speaking to Simon Dudley, who is the former chair of Homes England, the government body that helps, stimulate housing across the country. He was the chair of the organisation for a few years, I think under Boris Johnson. And then in more recent times, he's actually been the chair of the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation. So Ebbsfleet, this massive basically a new town that's being built just to the southeast of London in North Kent. He's been there trying to actually deliver homes on the ground, so I had a chat with him about that. But more importantly, and the real excuse for talking to him, was that he's the chair of a new campaign group called the Representative Planning Group. And their whole goal is to basically try and persuade Westminster and councils that people actually do want to build things. So his whole goal is to go out and make the case that when the NIMBYs pop up and say, oh, nobody wants this thing to be built, to go, actually, there's evidence they do, and commission polls and other things to support that. So yeah, I had a chat with him to find out more about how the Representative Planning Group, the RPG, is going to do it, and a lot of other housing stuff too. Here's our chat. So I'm delighted to be joined now by Simon Dudley, the new chair of the Representative Planning Group. Simon, thank you for joining us. Could you maybe start by just telling us what the Representative Planning Group is all about?
Yeah, look, absolutely. It's great to be here, everyone. Look, my experience with planning decisions, I've been the leader of a local authority, Windsor and Maidenhead Council, and we were very pro-housing development there and regeneration. And, this is really, we put in place a borough local plan, joint ventures with major house builders to develop, regenerate Maidenhead Town Centre, to develop Maidenhead Golf Club. And, this was my first experience of really how difficult it was to get things done and how there was a concentration of anti-shrill voices. And it was incredibly hard to get to the silent majority, the people who are just dropping the kids off at school, going to work, trying to get on with their lives. And as well-intentioned as they might be, you were always being drowned out by this very vocal minority. That made it really hard. And that, I can understand why some politicians, both nationally and locally, are concerned about development, because it's the anti-voices which are amplified, and they don't see that the silent majority is pro-development. So the Representative Planning Group is really looking to try and help there, to change national legislation so that you get a more representative balance of opinions which come forward with, plan-based or individual application-based planning applications. And, the data shows that if you have far more representative surveys rather than slightly self-collecting, the majority of people are supportive of development. You're never going to get everyone supportive of it, but the majority are. And that will generally make it easier for politicians to be pro-development. It will reduce the kind of NIMBY, sort of resistance to development. And ultimately, it will mean that we can build more homes, we can build infrastructure, we can get more economic growth, and we can pay for the public services we want. And everyone's going to get an opportunity to either rent a home or buy a home, the same opportunity that a lot of us had, many years ago. So that's what we're doing. It's cross-party, the representative planning group. So we've got co-chair, Mike Reeder, Labour MP. We've got Liberal Democrats in there. In fact, we tried to get Reform involved. They're not involved yet, but I was with someone from the Reform Board yesterday, try and get them involved in it. So it's cross-party, play nice. We've all got one goal to try and, sort of get far better representative planning to help us build homes.
So is the plan to, I think you mentioned there, actually change legislation to make this part of the law so that when, a planning application is put in or something like that, there has to be some sort of, polling or survey done, more so than normal consultation where, you just get the angry people who live nearby trying to say no?
That is the plan. We've got a WhatsApp group. Look, James, I know you're in that WhatsApp group. We've got about 264, a fairly precise number. We have got 264 people who are in that group. Developers, politicians, lobbyists, people who are generally pro-building, a lot of YIMBYs in there. So that is like concentrating voices. But the intention ultimately is to change national legislation. There's been some fantastic research by the think tank Public First. So Jack Airy there, who's heavily involved in all of this. So the intention is to change the law to make it easier for all voices to be heard, to bring forward their view, and therefore to make it easier to get homes built.
And what would that look like in practice in terms of how would you go about obtaining the views of a much wider range of people? Is there a particular set of tools that you think we should be using?
Yeah, look, the representative surveys, it's immersive and digital polling, citizens panels, a whole different range of ways in which you can amplify the pro-lobby's voices, not amplify it over and above those who are negative, but just give them the opportunity to be involved in this process. So I think very much focus it on plan making as well. We want to sort of restore trust in the planning process and support the general YIMBY approach to house building and infrastructure development.
How do you think what your approach fits into the sort of broader YIMBY sphere ecosystem? Because there's many different YIMBY groups. We've spoken to a whole bunch of them on our show over the last few months. I guess, if you want to be representative, if the consensus opinion is local people say no, would you be happy to go, well, fair enough, they say no, therefore we think this shouldn't be built?
Yeah, look, I don't think you can say, well, we want to hear people's voices, and then you create an atmosphere where people's voices could come forward, and then you say, yeah, but I don't like that answer. So look, there will be situations where, and this is a debate and a healthy debate which goes on in the YIMBY community. There's a kind of maximalist type approach, which is not wanting to upset anyone, but build anything anywhere. Yeah. And then there's, another approach, which is more, housing maximalist as well on that. So my, general approach is that there are countless places where development can take place, where we're constraining it, that the green belt is not all green, that we should be building far more around transport nodes and public transport. There should be, greater density there, height, that we are sub-developing these types of areas, which is itself, putting more pressure on, truly high-value agricultural land, beautiful green belt. Let's look at London. London is an absolute disaster, what is going on there. A market which is gradually just grinding to a halt, one of the world's true capitals. And when that's going on, it's just putting pressure all across the country if you can't develop in London at scale. So look, I think you have to represent, but you have to be realistic and respect people's views. If they come back and say, no, look, we don't want this, but at least make sure people have got the opportunity to express their views.
It's quite funny doing this podcast. I think over the last few months, I think me and my co-host Martin, we've been radicalised to the point where we'd probably tarmac over our own mother's gardens at this point.
Well, I understand that, because there is such a degree of frustration out there that, people want progress, and then you get to quite an ultra position. I can understand that. But I think we've got an awful long way to go to get to a really sensible YIMBY proposition here.
And more broadly, so your background is you've been in housing for a very long time. You were the former chair of Homes England, which was the government body which funded affordable housing and identified various sites where we could build and so on. So given the current government have made building a big part of their agenda, what's your broad view on this? Are they doing enough? Is there anywhere they should be going further? Are there any other sort of policy levers you think they should be pulling to try and increase the rate of home building?
Yes, look, I'm a Conservative, so I'm looking for a Labour government, but at least I thought that they would be pro housing development, and that would lead to economic growth. The Conservatives got themselves into a bad place towards the latter stages of the Conservative government. Frankly, look, I strongly believe that Robert Jenrick's planning reforms, the zonal planning system, was bottled after the Chesham and Amersham by-election result. And that was a big mistake of the last Conservative administration. So, I was hopeful that Labour, at least in this area, were going to make progress. And they started off, I think, with some reasonable changes, but we can really see now that they're backing off because of the environmental lobby. These all-powerful quangos like Natural England. God, I've had my run-ins with Natural England and the environment. So it's not materialising, and it's certainly not materialising in London. There's too much regulation. Some of that is the responsibility of the Conservatives, hands up. But major issues with building safety regulator. I was at an event yesterday with a major house builder, and they had provided a deck which shows the viability of a scheme, which I think was 2014, and compared how the regulations would change that particular scheme in London to today. Frankly, made it non-viable because of all of the various regulations which have come into place through the London Plan and the supplementary elements of that. So, short answer, I thought Labour started off looking like they were going to be like 7 or 8 out of 10, but they're quickly drifting down to like 3 out of 10. So they're just not doing it. So it's a disappointment. And I am extremely keen that the Conservative Party is head and shoulders the most pro-house building, economic growth, infrastructure investment political party that is in the House of Commons.
I was going to say, another one of the literal hats that you wear is that you're involved in the Conservative YIMBY campaign with your blue Build Baby Build hats. And you seem to have had a load of success quite recently in at least persuading Kemi Badenoch to support all of your ideas. It seems that the transition in the Tories might be happening to be sort of more pro-YIMBY directionally.
Yeah, look, that's Sir Simon Clarke there who's chairing that. James is still there. There's a whole group of people through Onward, where I'm a senior fellow, the think tank. That's a great initiative. Again, I think it's just an example of where you concentrate voices. The hats are like a revelation, to be honest. There was a blue hat, there was a red hat. I thought the red hat was maybe a bit too Trumpian. So, the blue hat is better. It's got Build Baby Build on it. And I think when you've got this concentration of voices, a movement in the Conservative Party, it concentrates the minds. If you look at Kevin Hollingrake, who was the Shadow Secretary of State, he's now the party chairman. He's very supportive. I was with James Cleverly yesterday, who's now the Shadow Secretary of State, very supportive. Leader of the opposition, Kemi, is very supportive. So people are really buying into this. And the whole Conservative Parliamentary Party may not necessarily be in exactly that place. But as one of our prior prime ministers said once, when the herd moves, it moves. So when people see the direction of travel, the herd moves, and we're going to make the herd move.
Fantastic. And finally, or our last sort of bucket of questions I want to pick from, because again, you've been involved in this sort of thing for so long, is most recently you were the chair of the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation. I guess it's one of Britain's only sort of new towns that have been built in the last few decades. And we know that in the next few months, I think Sir Michael Lyons is going to come out with some recommendations about where to build a whole bunch of other new towns. So I was just wondering, given your sort of experience with Ebbsfleet, what sort of lessons do you think we, as in, people interested in politics or the government and so on, should be taking from the Ebbsfleet experience and applying to this next generation of new towns, which will hopefully happen?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Firstly, these things take time and they take a lot of money. Yeah, you have to pick the sites carefully. A disadvantage Ebbsfleet always had, you would think, oh, it's just with the high-speed one there, the international station there. That should be pretty straightforward. But just one thing which made life very difficult is that when the concession was let for the operation of high-speed one, that contained the surface car parking, thousands of surface car parking spaces around the station, which we did a huge amount of work on lifting and shifting that, building multi-story car parks in order to be able to create the development platforms for the kind of core, the urban development there, at a huge cost to the taxpayer. So different parts of government must be aligned and must understand. So the Department for Transport must understand that, there's a piece of infrastructure and they're putting surface car parking in there and they're allowing that to go into the private sector. It's going to cost money to get that back. So that's very important, sort of lesson. I'm very pro urban development corporations, mayoral development corporations. And if you can possibly do it to depoliticize the planning process. At Ebbsfleet, we were the local planning authority, not the plan-making authority. We had a fantastically skilled KC who chaired that, and we had a non-politicized planning process there, which meant stuff got done, good decisions were made, and they were made quickly. So that was, again, a real positive. So we had a big run-in with Natural England for Ebbsfleet, as you'll have seen all of this around not so much jumping spiders, but land that the state owned, the taxpayer owned, which did not have jumping spiders on it, which they designated as a triple SI. Angela Rayner should be revoking that triple SI so that housing can get built there, build another 1,300 homes there. She's got the power to do that. Get on and do it. If you're serious about 1.5 million homes, do that, please, Ange. I think Ebbsfleet, a great example of what you can do, but it takes time and it takes a lot of public money.
I want to dig into the jumping spiders because this has become almost like a meme. I think that people are broadly aware of. I think the Prime Minister himself mentioned the jumping spiders in a speech not so long ago. So as you were on the inside, could you talk a bit about how annoying was this to the plan? Because for everyone listening, so the Ebbsfleet Central development, at the moment it's like Ebbsfleet Station is this massive station in the middle of basically a field with a car park around it. There was these great plans to build quite dense, like a town centre around the station. Then this SSSI came in and sort of sliced off half the site and said, no, the spiders are there or could be there. So how frustrating was this from your perspective? I mean, was this did this delay plans or force a lot of rethinking and a lot of just delay and so on?
Yes. So what happened here is you've got the Swanscombe Peninsula, which that was a NSIP, nationally significant infrastructure project, for a theme park and on, really wilded land there. And that's a unique habitat. Yeah. And Natural England wanted to designate that as a triple SI. Below it was a spine of land owned by Ebbsfleet, which could potentially have provided vehicle access to the Swanscombe Peninsula. No jumping spiders, no ecological value. And then you sort of get a notification from Natural England that they are considering designating your land as a triple SI. And then you've got a period of time before there is a board meeting of Natural England where the executives and non-executive directors meet in their infinite wisdom as judge, jury, and executioners to decide whether or not they're going to confirm the triple designation. I felt they're going to do this. Yeah. So we started changing our plans just to develop to the right-hand side as you look at High Speed 1 for some of Ebbsfleet Central, but to stay away from the land to the left, Ebbsfleet Central West. We went along, very skilled team from Ebbsfleet, to make representations to the board at the time that they're considering the designation, that their data was wrong, it was out of date, there was no case for designating the land as a triple SI. In fact, some of it already had car parking on it. It was simply not the right decision to make, and they went and designated it. Yeah. I think in their minds, we always felt that it was like belt and braces to try and protect the Swanscombe Peninsula. Let's wrap this other land up in it. There's been views that there's the way that they analysed the world, it was the right thing to do, but it clearly just wasn't the right thing to do. This was Government quango stops government arm's length body building homes in a housing fund. This is like, there's everything about dysfunctional government in this country, but it can be fixed. Angela Rayner, at the stroke of a pen, can effectively revoke this triple SI on the state-owned land and give the opportunity to build 1,300 homes there in a housing crisis. So she should do that. Do that, Angela. Prove that you are serious about 1.5 million homes, or we will chase you around on this issue. And as I said to the board and the executives in my last board meeting, I said, the land is going nowhere. Yeah. We will be back. Au revoir. Yeah.
Fantastic. On that note, we will leave it there. Hopefully, Angela Rayner will be listening and will finally get out her pen and do this. I couldn't agree more with you on this. Natural England are sort of a recurring villain on our podcast. But for now, Simon Dudley, we'll put links to the representative planning group and all the other stuff on the abundancepod.com website. But for now, thank you very much. So, Martin, that's just about it for this week's show. How do you think it went?
Oh, I think pretty solid. We've got some good HS2 action for the fans. We've got you ranting about a personal grievance. It's business as usual, really, James.
Excellent. Yeah. And to be clear, if anyone listening also can get us more invites to interesting infrastructure, tunnels, bridges, we'll see the lot, airports, train stations, genuinely any excuse to put on a high vis and a hard hat and go and look at some diggers doing some stuff, please do invite us. That's just a completely transparent beg for me to try and get some interesting days out.
Oh yeah, you would not believe the high vis safety gear I had to wear for HS2. I was full orange, James. It was dare I say, an erotic sight.
Oh, God. Okay. On that disturbing note, that's it for this week's show. Check out our Substacks. Links are all on abundancepod.com. But for now, thanks for listening.
See you next week.